Thanks for being here. Just a heads up, my internet connection is poor. Michael is here with me. When I am swinging out, he will let me know, and then I'll repeat that part. So today we have 30 minutes to discuss manuscript writing and another to discuss the discussion section of your manuscript. And then we'll have another 30 minutes to open up a space for you to ask any question that you find relevant for manuscript writing. It does not have to be limited to the discussion section of manuscript writing. Anything that has to do with manuscript, we're open to. Of course, this is my university, the most beautiful university in Africa, and the one place to be. I invite you anytime you come to Ife, ask me and I'll take you around the most beautiful campus there is. The objective of the session is to describe the process of interpreting key findings from your research work. So you've done your research, remember that you write your results. How do you now write up the results in a way that is engaging in the discussion section? We'll talk about comparing contrasted findings from studies with unusual findings and how to make valid inferences. And also, hopefully you'll learn how to make recommendations. That's the 4 objectives for the session. So for the session, what I'll be doing is discussing the importance of that section, discussing the content of the session, how to write it in a way that will meet our objectives, and then I'll summarize and conclude. Before I go into details, first of all, I'll take us back to our stroke checklist. I'll take us back to the stroke checklist section. If you have been with us throughout this training, you will recall you would recall that for whatever you want to do, you must research guidelines. If you're doing lab studies, there are research guidelines for it. If you're doing systematic review or scoping reviews, there are research guidelines for it. If you're doing qualitative studies, there are research guidelines. If you're doing modeling studies, there are guidelines. Every single type of study has its guideline. You must be familiar with the guideline to help you write your manuscript. So I am looking at the guideline for cross-sectional studies. You would look at the guideline for the discussion section for your own type of study. Once again, qualitative studies also have guidelines. In the discussion section, it is that the first paragraph is a summary of the key results related to your study objectives. I repeat, the first paragraph is of the key results related to your findings. So in effect, I share how you write. Michael, please help me to check the participants that we have. The scribbling is starting. So if we have anybody in that doesn't have an identity, please check them out.
All right, ma'am.
Thank you. All right, so one of the key things I say is that when you summarize your key findings from the results, which is the answer to your study objective, you don't repeat the results. For example, let's say in your results, you found out that 5 out of 10 students have teeth in their mouths. In the result, you must write it like that. 5, 20%. 5 is, let's say 20%. Just assume 5 in bracket 20% of 10 students have teeth in their mouths. That is your results. You write results, you write with precision exactly what you found. If it's 20.25, you write 20.25. In the discussion, you can now summarize and say 1 in 5, 1 in 20. You notice that 1, you can now approximate. You don't approximate in your results. You can't do such approximation and interpretation in your discussion. This is one of the flaws I find when many people write. And if you can learn to do this, you find out that you'll be able to do your summary well in the discussion without repeating the figures that you have in your results. One of the things you keep finding is people discussing their results and they're repeating the figures. No, that throughout your manuscript is synchronized in a way that you might be saying things, but you're not repeating what you're saying. And then the next paragraph after your summary is discussing your study limitations. Actually, study strength and your study limitations. This is very important because why you do this is that you introduce people to the possible biases there are before they start to read the interpretation. So they are understanding what the limitations of the study is, and they can absorb your interpretation based on the limitation there is. Conventionally, you would write your limitation at the end, but no. If you're following and you're writing for a Q1, Q2 journal, you're following the research guidelines, the limitation comes as the next paragraph to your key findings. After that, so once again, your limitations, a discussion of your study limitations, and usually your strength comes immediately after your results. It is only after these 2 paragraphs, or possibly 3, because you would also have written the strength of your study, that you start to write the interpretation. The discussion is an interpretation of your results. You have answered your objective, your finding, you interpret it. If you recall, after last week's session, I highlighted that one of the things that you do in the discussion is not a comparison of your study with other studies. That's just one element, but it's not a strong element. You can have your discussion to comparison of data. Remember, this is the stroke guideline, and this is the same you find in other guidelines. It is an interpretation of your finding. How do you interpret? For every finding, you ask why. What is the meaning of this finding? Why is this different? If you are doing comparison, you start to ask yourself, why is my study the same as observed in Iran? Why is my study the same as I observed in America, though our cultures are different? Why am I observing something different from Ghana while we are in cultural place? Why is my result in Ile-Ife different from Kano, despite the fact that we are both in Nigeria? Why is my result in Ile-Ife different from Malaysia, while we are only 20 minutes drive away? The interpretation of your result, and believe me, it takes a lot of reading. And then one of the end parts before you write your conclusion is that piece where you talk external validity. How do you generalize your study findings? Usually, you will be able to say your study finding is generalizable to the study environment if you have used a probability sampling method. Then it's generalizable. If you collected your data by convenience sampling, your finding can only be generalized to this population it represents. I repeat, if you collected your sample by convenience sampling, which is a non-probability sampling method, you can only generalize your result to the sample it represents. For example, during COVID, for very good valid reason, you had to collect your data online. You had to collect your data online. You had to do your survey online. You used electronic, and it was open to anybody. That was a non-probability sampling. You would find out that if you collect your data online, it will be skewed to those that have internet access. One, it will be skewed to those that have an iPhone, a smartphone. That is two. Therefore, your finding cannot be generalized to everybody. It's going to be generalized to those that have the ability to have an iPhone and internet access. And when you look at the educational profile of those participants, you will find that it is skewed to those with tertiary education. It will be skewed because they have the kind of money to buy a smartphone. You will not find a population with low socioeconomic strata. Whereas the Nigerian population is 60% low socioeconomic strata. 60% of the population are living in poverty. But you find that your 70% of your participants are those with tertiary education, high socioeconomic strata. Therefore, your study findings is only generalizable to those with high socioeconomic strata. It cannot be generalized to Nigeria. This is the kind of things that matter in your interpretation. So, once again, I just wanted to show you this, and then we'll go to the slides. When you have your discussion, the first thing is to do your summary of your key findings. The next paragraph is to discuss the strengths and limitations of your study. The next thing is to discuss your finding with respect to your objective. You see that this is not my guide. It is the guide it's an international guide. They tell you in reference to your study objective, going back, in reference to your study objective, your key finding is in reference to your study objective. Your discussion on limitation and any bias that was introduced, you discuss it. Then your interpretation is in reference to your objective. It's an interpretation, not a comparison of data. Interpretation. Why did you have this result? Why is this result similar to other studies? Why is this result different from other studies? Despite the fact that we have the same profile. Why am I finding a different result among people living with HIV in Nigeria from people living with HIV in Ghana? And then you also end with the generalizability. You discuss it. What's the external validity of your study? All right, so let us go to some other things as we discuss study in the discussion section. So why is the discussion important? Please note that this discussion section for me is the hardest part to write. It is the hardest part to write because it takes you to investigate and inquire about your findings. You have to read afresh. It is one of the hardest things to write. I don't know why this is coming from. Okay, so it's one of the hardest things to write. It's not easy to write it because you have to think about the meaning, the interpretation of your results. You have to tell the readers what the result means and why it is important. This is where your ingenuity comes in, because it is about your ability to reflect on the findings and find an answer to that finding. Many times you have to do a lot more literature readings to try to understand the meaning of your results. When you do this and write up, you find out that at the end of the day, you will be generating new hypotheses, new reason, what is possible, and encouraging people to do future research based on the hypothesis you've generated. Please note that when a paper is referenced, you do not reference a paper because of the content in the introduction. No. You reference a paper because of the discussion, the insights, the meaning, the reflections that is in the discussion section. This is why you quote a paper, because that is where your ingenuity and opinion is expressed. In the introduction section, you are pulling many literatures together to generate your conceptual framework for your study or your theoretical framework. Your opinion is not expressed in the introduction. And therefore, when you read a manuscript and you see a reference in the introduction section, the right thing is for you to go read that reference. Be sure that it reflects what you want to say and use that reference for your manuscript. Not for you to quote that manuscript because of the reference in it. No, it's a wrong reflection. However, when you read the discussion section of that manuscript, and that discussion section is raising hypotheses, is raising issues that support what your position, then that is the reason why you would quote that paper. And that's the reason why they will quote your paper. And that's why your paper will have power. Your paper will garnish power, not because of your introduction, but because of the power of your discussion in a way that it answers questions. It answers questions. And then it can also generate hypotheses. And because of that, people are quoting your paper because you said, let's test this hypothesis further. Once again, in your discussion section, the first paragraph is a summary of your study findings in languages that you are not repeating what you have said in the discussion. It's a summary, but it uses a language that is not repeating what you've seen in the results section. So in this point, once again, you're not, if your results said 49% of your study participants had long hair, your summary will be saying 1 in 2 participants had long hair. That's your interpretation. But in the results section, you don't say 1 in 2 because it's an interpretation and it's an approximation because your study result is 49%. So you report 49%. The next thing you write is the strength of your study and then the limitation. Many times your strength and limitation can be in a single paragraph, or otherwise it might be in 2 paragraphs. It's only after you have done this, and once again you write your strength and limitation as an immediate paragraph after your summary, and not the last paragraph, because you bring your audience to start to reflect on the limitation and use that lens to go into the interpretation or your explanation. Following that, you write your, once again, with reference to your objective. We must make sure that every single objective you raised, you discuss, whether the finding is significant or insignificant. Whether it's significant or not significant, you must discuss your study findings, whatever it is. Once again, I can't overemphasize that you stay within the scope of your objective. So you give meaning of your findings and how to relate to what others have done. It is comparing it. So it's not about comparing figures, you're comparing with what others have done. So in Nigeria, the prevalence of those that have hair is 49% long hair, whereas in Egypt, the prevalence of those that have long hair is 23%. Okay, so my discussion would say that the prevalence of those that have long hair in Nigeria is higher than the 29% that is reported in Egypt. That's a comparison. You know, to explain why. Why do you think this difference? Why? You can say, well, in Nigeria, the food is very heavy towards protein, unlike in Egypt, where it's very heavy towards carbohydrate. There's evidence to show that eating protein lengthens the hair. So this may be the reason why. So it's that possibility that somebody else will now take and study in the next study. So you explain anything that is surprising, unexpected, or inconclusive. You must discuss everything. You must answer your study objective. And then you suggest further research. This is the content of your discussion. Please, your discussion should not include any of this following information. You cannot be finding new results in your discussion. A result that was not presented in the results section, you cannot be finding it in your discussion. You only discuss what you have reported in the results section. You only discuss what has been reported in the results section. You don't bring a new result in the discussion section. If it is not, you cannot discuss it. Number two, you do not repeat the results in the section. So if you wrote 49%, you can't be writing 49, 32, repeating everything you've repeated in the result and then repeat it in the discussion. No, it doesn't go that way. In addition, you do not discuss things outside the scope of the study objective. Your study objective is to find how many people that have long hair. You don't go and start discussing how many people have protein in their food, and then how food in Nigeria is not rich in protein. No, the scope is about the hair, and then you discuss hair. You also do not have unwarranted speculations and sweeping statements. This is one of the things I've seen many times in our Nigerian manuscripts, sweeping statements. You just generalize. You only saw one out of 5 people that was eating corn in the morning. And then you say, oh, Nigerian people are poor. One out of every 5 persons is eating corn. Nigerians are poor people. They are in a state of hunger. I'm telling you, this is the kind of sweeping statement that you find. Focus. Be truthful. You are only saying what you have seen, not what you assume. Another thing that I also now in the way we discuss is also the strength we give to our study findings. If you are doing cross-sectional studies, remember that all qualitative study, if you are doing cross-sectional studies, remember that all qualitative studies and descriptive quantitative studies are cross-sectional in design. So when you are doing, as simple as that, all you can do is postulate, because what you are capturing is the point in time analysis. What time? You can never make a cause-effect relationship. You cannot say the data you generated from a cross-sectional study, you cannot conclude that it is the cause of it, that it is the reason why something is happening. You can only speculate. It seems like it is suggesting. So you can't do a cross-sectional study and say this is the answer. No. Or that this is a cause-effect relationship. This is what is causing it. You can't. So you have to be cautious in your interpretation of your data based on the study design. If I did a clinical study trial where everything is constant, only thing that is variable was my intervention, then it is a definite cause-effect relationship. But if it's cross-sectional, it cannot be. It's just a speculation. You can only develop an hypothesis. It's a suggestion. That's all you can make because it's a cross. So your study design also gives you the power of inference. If you are doing a cross-sectional study, be careful with the inferences you make. It is not conclusive. It's suggestive. And you can't, tangential issues means you're going off point. Avoid those things in the discussion. Do not make conclusion that is not supported by your data. You can only conclude. The safest way to make conclusions is to write about the answer to your study objective. What was the answer you found? And make a recommendation. That's how you conclude. Those are the two things in your conclusion. You answer the objective, you state, summarize what the answer to your objective is, and then you make a recommendation. The discussion should be effective, interesting, and relevant. Again, it's about interpretation. It's discussing key findings first. Something new your study is saying. So you remember that now you're studying your key objective, you are discussing your objective. If there's anything in your objective that is new and has not been found or discussed before, let that be the first thing you're discussing, of your objectives. And then you discuss others. If this is everybody has found it, say it. It's not new. Everybody has found it. What you're finding is not new from others, and discuss what makes the finding, important. What makes that finding important? First of all, that when you started your study was addressing a gap. If there's no gap, there's no study. It was addressing a gap. That means we don't have that information. It's a gap. So once you get to your discussion and you're finding that what you have done is not different from what others have found, it is still very important, and you discuss it. So this gap, although I've answered the question, is the same with what the whole world has found. Now you explain why. It's still important because now we know that is from what you're finding is not different from any other person, but you still discuss it. As much as possible, you link your findings. Don't make your findings, you discuss section 1, the finding section 2, the finding paragraph 3. If it's possible, link them together. It takes a lot of skills. I know that. It takes a lot of skills. But linking them is like telling a story. Your discussion must be as interesting as your introduction. Your story, you're linking everything together. It's the same thing as your discussion. It must also be a story, linking it all together, ensuring that the thing that goes in the second paragraph is linked to the first paragraph, and there's a transition into the second paragraph. Okay? Although the first paragraph I'm talking about age, let the next paragraph kind of link to what you found in age, and not, completely somebody sitting down and reading and will not leave it until they are finished. It reduces your chances of getting unnecessary queries. Okay, so once your discussion is linking, it reduces your chances of people asking you unnecessary queries. Once again, your conclusion, the conclusion section of your discussion, remember, you must have a conclusion. Sometimes you would write it conclusion, sometimes you won't write it. The conclusion is the last paragraph. It's the last paragraph of the discussion. You must have a conclusion. So your conclusion is restating what is most important without repeating the words. These are where the skills come in. You highlight the overall significance of it and state the future direction, your recommendation. That's what you find in the conclusion. It's like you're summarizing your finding. But remember that you're summarizing your finding, you're answering your objective. You answer the objective. as you're doing all those things, you're not repeating words. That is why discussion is a lot of skills in writing. You're not repeating the words. You're not repeating the word, the things you're saying over and over. But in the conclusion, you are stating the conclusion, the findings of the answer to your objective, and you are giving your recommendation, which is your future direction. Please do not put a new argument into your conclusion. Your is concluding what you have already said. You can't be discussing something new in conclusion. If there's something new to discuss, go back into the discussion and discuss it. Your conclusion is not new argument, it's not new data, it's the summary of everything you have been saying. Okay? And please do not fail to answer the research question you have generated for yourself. And do not fail to results, the big picture, the big thing that came out from your study. Okay, I'll soon finish. I think this should be my last slide, and then we'll open up the space for discussion. So this discussion is what makes your paper quoted. It reflects your understanding of the study findings, and it also generates new hypotheses and proposition for future studies. This is what your discussion section says. This is one of the two reasons why your research is quoted, and is the most powerful reason your manuscript will remain quoted for many years. It is not your introduction. I'm sure some of you will still find papers of 1957, 1968 very relevant, even in 2023. It is because their discussion was powerful. They generated hypotheses. They answered questions. They explained their findings. Okay? That is why. And the discussion must tell a coherent story. Everything is key. The person that is reading is nodding the head. Oh, wow. This is possibly why. Oh, wow. This is the reason why the finding in Africa is different from the finding in Europe. Oh, wow. So Northern Nigeria from Southern Nigeria. Oh, wow. Okay, he explains why the problem is more in young people as opposed to older people. That's what your discussion does. And this discussion uses a language that reflective of the study design. Okay, I try to explain that. You don't overstretch the truth. You don't reflect your personal biases. We'll be talking about this personal biases and reflecting the language you use in next week's presentation. You unknowingly, if you do not train yourself, reflect your bias in your discussion, and people will not engage, especially when when your reviewer is on the other side. No, he's going to throw it out. It's going to just blow a vessel. No. Okay, and when your design can, once again, if your study design is only cross-sectional, you cannot say a cause-effect relationship. You can only suggest. If it's a longitudinal study, then you're starting to do cause-effect relationship. But then, depending on the design, you must reflect the limitation of that study. If it's a clinical study, a clinical trial, or a meta-analysis, or a systematic review, then you can say this definitely is a cause-effect thing. Okay, never overstretch. This is one of the things I repeat, continue to see, is overstretching the truth. And many people will throw the paper out simply because it's an overstretch of the truth. And always enable your discussion to give a new to readers. People must have insights, new insights, when they read your discussion section. It cannot be a boring story. It cannot be a boring story. You must gradually get your audience to have a new insight by reading your discussion. Remember also, one of I think the most difficult part of a manuscript is the introduction and the discussion. The discussion is a lot more difficult because in the introduction and the discussion, you have to get your readers engaged. You have to have the skill of writing a novel, short novel, because you must use good English, you must use good transition, but the discussion is a lot more difficult, but it's a skill that you must acquire. Okay? So I've come to the end, and I hope you found this enlightening. We have another 25 minutes, and the space is to questions. Please do feel free to raise your hands and ask questions. Thank you for listening. So I'm open to questions, and once again, it's questions on anything with manuscript writing, not necessarily limited to the results of your manuscript. Please feel free. Do you have questions? Raise your hands or put it in the chat box. Okay. I'm not seeing anything yet. I'm not seeing anything yet. Anyone that has a question? Yes, somebody has the hands raised. Promise, can you mute your mic and ask a question?
Good morning, Prof. Thank you so much for this enlightening session. Honestly, I always look forward to every bit of the sessions. Despite today was kind of confusing, but I really appreciate the effort. Just my question is kind of unrelated to today's topic, but it has always been on my mind. Even last week, I wanted to ask it. I wanted to ask, you made mention of systematic review or meta-analysis, that it's when you do them that you can be able to say exactly that this is what your
cost-effective relationship.
Exactly. So I wanted to ask, can you do a systematic review without doing meta-analysis, or must systematic review go with meta-analysis? So if you do systematic review without doing meta-analysis, does that mean that you cannot state a cause and effect relationship with your study?
Excellent question, Promise, and I'm so happy that you finally asked the question. Thanks. You cannot state a cause-effect relationship when you do a cross-sectional studies. You cannot state a cause-effect relationship when you do a cross-sectional study. You can only state cause-effect relationships when you do longitudinal study. However, with the longitudinal studies, I hope you know the longitudinal studies are cohort studies, case as well as clinical trials. Those are the three. With those three, because it's longitudinal, you can cross-sectional is a point in time, and anything can change in the next minute. You only collected the data at this point in time. So your answer, your finding is only at that point in time, because even the next minute, the person, so it doesn't have a direction. You can postulate the direction. You can almost say this is the direction, but you cannot say conclusively, because you collected that data at a point in time. Unlike longitudinal study, which you've collected over time, 3 months, 10 months, 15 months, 2 years, 3 years. Some collect longitudinal studies for 15 years, 30 years, cohort studies. So you can do a cause-effect relationship with that. Even as at that, when you're doing cohort or case control, there are a lot of biases that come in. There are so many events in people's lives that can, becloud, confound the variables. So even though you can say a cause effect, your interpretation must acknowledge that it's a limitation. Okay, because there are too many confounders that you might not have taken care of from the data. Unlike a clinical trial where everything was constant. And remember, trials are not, take away the word clinical trials. Everything is held constant except the intervention. So a trial can be that I introduced education to this community and I did not introduce to this community The two communities must be exactly the same in their profile. The only difference is the education that I introduced. Therefore, I can conclusively say that the changes that I saw was because of education, because everything was constant. Okay, so with a trial, that is the one point that you can say, this is a cause of this, or this is actually linked to this. The answer you're finding is definitely because of this. So your design enables you to make conclusion. So if it's a cross-section, so you cannot be saying cause. The study finding is suggestive that when people have cough, it also has headache. But you are discussing it. You are discussing. Sorry, I see my internet. I saw my internet was unstable. So when you are discussing it, you are open to both sides. And you are opening argument that yes, it may be, but there's evidence that it may not be. That is the power of the discussion when it comes to cross-sectional studies. But when it comes to systematic review and meta-analysis, please note that systematic review without doing a meta-analysis. What you do in a systematic review is pull the papers together. You may not be able to do a meta-analysis from that systematic review when the papers are showing that the measures are different. All right. So I know, Promise, you're from you're from dentistry. So if you pull the papers together, and you're doing, let's say, period or let's say caries, one study used DMFT, another study used DMFS, another study measured caries using SICK, another study measured ICIDA, another study measured caries by Canberra. You can't do a meta-analysis, because you can't pull that data together. It's coming from everywhere, but you will do a systematic review. But if all the studies you pulled into your systematic review use the DMFT, then you can pull the data and do, because it's apples, you're pulling apples together. You can't put apples and oranges to do a meta-analysis, no. You put apples together, oranges together, and then you do your meta-analysis. So, but as we do know, the systematic review and meta-analysis is one of the topmost power in terms of evidence, because they are pulling. So if I pull cross-sectional studies together for a systematic review, I'm still not talking about cause-effect relationship. If I pull clinical trials or longitudinal studies together, then I'm talking about cause-effect relationship. So those interpretation also matters, depending on what you've done. Does that finally answer your question? Please let me know. Promise?
Yes, Prof. Thank you so much. It's quite clear now.
Question? Oh,
yes, Prof.
You're most welcome. Okay. Adibimpe says I should project my slide for my email and phone number again. I'm going to do that, but please don't. Only contact me when it's necessary. My life is busy. Okay. I'm projecting it, but yeah, make it the most essential reason. But I projected it. I can't read the comments. Can't see anybody. So let me try. All right, I can, but I don't know if it's stopping you. All right. Let me see. There are other comments. Just a minute. Noreen asked, how many paragraphs do you suggest for discussion section? I don't think there's any paragraph. I definitely know that you cannot have less than 4 paragraphs. I can say that confidently, because 1, the first paragraph is the summary. You must have that. 2, you have a next that discusses your strength, and a 3rd paragraph that discusses your limitation. It's also possible to combine strength and limitation in a single paragraph. And then you have the paragraph that interprets your results. So I am very confident that you will definitely have 4 paragraphs. You definitely would also have your conclusion. So that would be a 5th paragraph. in your but as part of the limitation, I do not have the strength. I do not have a prescription. But also knowing that you must you don't use words, don't be verbose. Only use words that are necessary, be concise, and be focused in your discussion in a way that you're taking us somewhere when you're discussing. You're taking us somewhere, okay? Without spending too much words, okay? I hope that helps you.
Thank you very much.
You're very much welcome.
All right, thank you.
You're very much welcome. Rukayat is asking, please kindly expatiate more on strength and limitation. Can the study design be mentioned here? Yes, if you strength and limitation, I'm going to ask you to read about it and share with us. But definitely, your study limitation can also be addressed. For example, my limitation will be the way I collected my data. If you use the non-probability sampling method, that's a limitation to generalizability of your study. If I use the probability sampling, that's a strength. I would say that as a strength because use of a non-probability sampling method implies that my study is generalizable. So that is a strength. But if I use the convenient sampling method, I would write it as a limitation because my study cannot be generalized to wherever it is that I'm talking as my target population. However, it can be generalized to whatever you find from your data analysis. Okay, so that's one. Your study design also can be mentioned as a strength or limitation. If I design my study using a clinical trial systematic review, that's a strength. For example, for many of the systematic review I am currently doing, one of my strengths is that this is the first systematic review that is happening in Nigeria on that study topic. Yes, my country is supposed to have the lowest prevalence of caries, and I'm doing the systematic review for the first time. Okay, so that is a strength. Okay, if you do a cross-section study, a limitation becomes that I cannot make a cause-effect conclusion. Effect relationship cannot be established because of the study design. So that's a limitation. So if there are other things, one of the ways to get appropriate limitations will be studying other people's papers. They write it. It's almost like you can find almost conventional things around what your limitations can be. If your peer reviewers also raise issues that you cannot address, this is the best place to place it. You place it in the limitation section that, this point you raise is valid, however, you can't answer it with the study, and then you write it there. Or for example, if I do a secondary data analysis, I'll make it clear that as a covariate, as a confounder, sociodemographic profile is an important confounder. Income is a confounder. However, because this is a secondary data analysis, these variables were not accessible. Primary data did not collect it. Okay, so the primary did not collect these variables that are supposed to be confounded. So you identified the limitation, yes. So your study design can be mentioned as a strength or as a limitation, whichever is appropriate. Rukayat, I hope that answers you. Quadri, I saw that you raised your hand. Do you want to unmute your mic and ask your question? I'm going to stop this now to enable me to see a lot more things. Quadri, Lawal, I saw your hands went up at a time. Do you want to ask a question?
Oh, thank you very much, ma'am. I was going to make a reference to study design being limitation, but you already made that point already, ma'am. That's why I dropped my hand.
All right. Or is there something you want to add to what I said? That would be perfect.
No, exactly what you said, ma'am. If the study design is not the best to answer your question, your objective, it can actually be a limitation. You can make a recommendation in subsequent study to bring in that form of study design. when the research is going to be repeated.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much. Thanks for confirming what I said. Dr. Obeta, please ask your question.
Okay, I've even sent it in the chat box. Let me ask it there. I was asking, I thank you very much for your presentation. And I'm asking, please, during a discussion, can you make reference to your table in result presentation table? For example, can I say in table 4, the study revealed that most of the respondents do not know how to take care of their children's clothing articles. Then I said that this finding may be as a result of not.
No, I will avoid that. If I am writing, I would avoid that. I would say my study indicated that children's clothing is a problem, and I'll discuss it. I won't go to say in table 1, in table 5. Remember that you have summarized your results in your paragraph 1.
Yes.
So what you are discussing is the summary. You understand? So your summary has highlighted your findings, and then you're now picking the summary and discussing it. So you don't go back to your result like saying, oh, my result showed that 55. My result, one of the key findings of my study, children's clothing are short. This is likely due to, then I discuss it. Rather than going back and saying, oh, 55% of my children's clothing were short. You don't need to go there. Or saying that table 3 should, just go straight. This is what you have summarized it. That's the key thing. Once you have summarized, you have left that section behind, and you're going forward with what you have. It's more of a narrative. If there's any figure that you're starting your discussion, it's probably the comparator figure. For example, maybe you saw that the children's clothing, there were 23% of them that their clothing was short. How we would discuss in this discussion is that the portion of children whose clothes were short is lower than the 82% seen in the US. Okay, so you're not bringing your figure in again. You're bringing the figure of US into your question. Does it make sense, Dr. Obeta? Dr. Obeta, does it make sense? Okay, I hope it helps, or at least I hope it helps every other person. But like I said,
it made sense, ma'am.
All right. So it's skills, but we must practice it. We mustn't give up. The more we're practicing it, the more we get proficient. One of the things I've seen many times, and I do discuss it with my mentees, there's a tendency to fall back into your old ways of doing things. There's a big tendency to fall back into your old ways of doing things. It's already challenging that you're having to undo. It's difficult to undo old habits. It's better that you started right. But if you have to undo, persist in doing the right thing. It will become a habit with time. But don't keep falling to the old habit. What you will find that, like I said, many of you have been publishing already. You are good publishers. You're already publishing. What this is taking you through is how to publish in a higher journal manuscript. Q1, Q2. Don't be afraid. I remember my mentee, one of the places she went to was place 1. And she got published. She's publishing in Lancet now. But she took time to learn it. And you see, once you learn it, it becomes yours forever, and then you can teach it. Don't be afraid to learn, and don't get tired of learning. Okay. But like I said, it's a lot difficult to undo old habits, but you must choose. You must choose to go the new way. Thank you, Doshima. Thank you, Doshima. Thanks for always being here. Yes, please, ma'am.
Prof, ma'am. Please, one more question.
Yes, ma'am. We have 6 minutes. I'm listening. Yes.
Please, even though this is outside the scope of your presentation,
yes, ma'am.
But is it proper after presenting your table in assuming it's a study in 4, after presenting your table? Yes, I'm talking of projects now. Is it necessary to write a summary of the findings, or major findings. Is it necessary to do that, to write that in thesis or dissertation?
Yes, in your thesis.
Not really article.
In your thesis.
Yes, ma'am.
Are you talking of the discussion section?
After press. No, before after just section. Immediately after.
In your results section.
Just immediately after. Yes, in the results section, immediately after presenting your findings in the table, immediately after it, you come and write major findings or summary of the findings. In that case, you itemize your findings, like 50.
I'm not sure. I think every institution will give you a guide. What you said is not usual. Where after you presented your result, before you get to your discussion, you kind of summarize and write your key findings. If that is the recommendation for your institution, if that is the recommendation for your institution, that will be okay. Or it's not conventional. In my own institution, that would not be required. But depending on what your institution requires, thesis format is very peculiar to each institution. Okay. So your institution will provide you the guidance of what they require. Yeah, thank you. Chika.
It's all right, ma'am. Thank you.
You're very much welcome. You're welcome. Chika, yes. We have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Prof.
Yes.
Prof, please, I don't know what happened. We saw 4 p.m. It's just now that somebody is saying that the class is going on. So 4 p.m. And personally, there's nothing I'm doing. I would have started with this lecture. Please, are we recording this lecture? Because I just came in because of the discussion I saw. We were giving 4 p.m. So
my apologies. I'm sure it's my error. I apologize. I'll check it.
Is that you?
Sorry.
Just note that I joined late. I saw it too.
My apologies. It's my fault. It's my fault.
I don't joke with your lecture, Prof. Thank you, man.
I apologize. I'm sure I should have checked what I sent out. I generated the things forever. It was my error. All our sessions is always 8 to 9. My apologies. We'll work around that. I'll apologize. Yeah. Sorry about that. I just want to quickly go. We have 2 more minutes. I want to go through what is here. The findings from a cross-sectional studies cannot be cost-effective, friends. Yes. From Sheriff. Is longitudinal suggestions at the inference. Yeah. All right. I think I answered Dr. Obeta's questions. Salilat Adebiyi says, how can I reference a journal or textbook that are more than 20 years that I found very useful for my study, since the rule says, I'm not sure about rules that says, thank you, Quadri. Have a reference list of 50, and 49 of your 50 list are 1957 papers. Of course, that is out of place. Okay. But if you reference one pivotal study that is 100 years old, is one. I think that's what the rule says. The rule does not say never reference an old paper. It does not say. It does not say that. There's no rule anywhere. What it says is that the majority of your reference cannot be old references. I can bet $1 million that is what the rule says. Anyone in your institution. All right. I think we've come to the end of another day. Once again, this recording is by my own institution. I would share once they give me. It's not my recording, it's my institution. I'm very thankful for Obafemi Awolowo University for allowing me to use this, and for the Central Office of Research for supporting me through this. Thank you very much, Michael, for being here. Have a good day, everyone.